put you over to an interview I did a few minutes ago with the Environment Secretary, George Eustice. And I started by talking to him about the government's plans for its so-called green industrial revolution. And in particular, I asked him to explain to me why Boris Johnson has chosen the date of 2030 for banning the sale of new petrol and diesel cars.
Well, the technology's actually come on faster, and what we've announced this week is an increase in the money that we'll put in place to install the infrastructures for charging points. And by bringing it forward to 2030, we can accelerate our progress, in particular towards Carbon Budget 5 and also the net zero target that we have.
What do you say, though, to those who will fear that something they think of as quite an important asset, their car, has just fallen in value very significantly as a result of what you've announced?
Well, this is sale of new cars, obviously, by that time.
But it'll affect the second-hand market, won't it?
Well, it'll affect the number of, in fact, after 2030, obviously there won't be a sale of cars that aren't electric. There won't be a sale of conventional cars as brand new cars. But I'm not sure they'll have a huge effect on the second-hand market, because when people buy a new car, they'll be buying a new electric car. Many already are. The technology's come on very, very quickly. You can even get Range Rovers now that are running on electric. So a great deal of progress has been made. Often technology, once it gets going and takes off, just as we saw, for instance, on offshore wind, it can actually deliver faster than you might have thought. But the key thing is to make sure we put in place the charging infrastructure to support it.
I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but actually 37% of cars on the road now are more than 10 years old. This will have an impact on the value of cars.
Well, it'll affect the type of new cars that are sold. Obviously, it'll only be when people buy a new car that this rule comes in. So if they did have an old car, there's not going to be a sort of ban on them using an older car that they might have. It'd only be at the point at which they buy new cars.
Now, you'll have seen that when it came to the rollout of broadband, rural areas, more remote areas, well, they weren't connected for years, and there are still areas which have terrible broadband. Why should we be confident that these charging points will be available everywhere?
Well, we are confident because we're putting a lot of money in to support the rollout of these charging points. It's often the case, in more rural areas, people have more ability to park closer to their home and that they can charge that way. That's been the case to date. But it's in the urban areas where obviously you've got to have in place that infrastructure, because people are often parking their cars on the roadside. And obviously in some of the sort of larger villages, that's the case too.
Now, one thing that people think is slightly odd is you are penalising people who have conventional cars. Why aren't you taking more action against airplane emissions and airlines?
Well, one of the key things that the Prime Minister announced is additional funding to support research and development, both in how we can decarbonise marine transport and shipping in particular, which is a problem, but also in aviation too. You can't have an electric plane at the moment, so we don't have the technology in place to be able to decarbonise flight, and we don't want to stop people flying altogether. There have been steps made, for instance, to introduce things like carbon offsetting, but part of the announcement this week was to support research and development to try to decarbonise the fuels used in aviation.
Now, on other important government decisions, defence spending going up, aid spending coming down. Are they the right priorities?
Well, look, there's a spending review process underway. When that's concluded, there will be an announcement made in the usual way. So I'm not going to get into speculation about what's happening on different budgets.
But you were advising a Prime Minister who takes enormous pride in that 0.7% commitment when it comes to overseas aid spending. Presumably you think that's an important commitment.
Well, it is, but there's also the case that obviously our economy has sadly, due to the pandemic, contracted this year. So there's already been a review of some of the spending on international aid for that reason. And that still keeps us within that 0.7% target.
But is the 0.7% important?
Well, it is important, and it's a commitment we've made, and we're one of the few countries that have put that on a statutory footing. But, you know, there are...
So you're saying you're not going to breach it? You're not going to breach it?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a spending review process that's underway, and I know it is the case that sometimes the types of spending that count towards aid has been questioned in the past. People have considered that and looked at that. But look, I'm not going to sort of prejudge any announcement that might be made linked to the spending review on this. All government departments are currently in their respective discussions with the Treasury, and you'll have to wait and see, I'm afraid, to see what comes out of that process.
Now, the Prime Minister says that devolution has been a disaster, which broadly suggests we've either got to roll it back or allow Scotland independence. Which is it?
Well, I think he's clarified today exactly what he meant when this came up. And the point is he believes in devolution. He championed devolution while he was in City Hall. But his point is that the Scottish National Party have undermined devolution because they've used it to sow division and used it to try to advance a separatist agenda, rather than use it as it was originally intended, as a genuine devolved settlement where powers were devolved, where an administration would exercise those powers. What we've seen constantly with the SNP is them using those powers to try to drive a wedge between Scotland and the UK, and that has undermined devolution, and that was the point that he was making.
George Eustice, very good to see you.
Thank you very much.